Diana Reynolds had exactly $300 to her name when she walked into the dying town of Cedar Mills. Her hiking boots worn thin from months on mountain trails, her loyal, aging beagle, Baron, padding faithfully by her side. The locals called her crazy for buying the abandoned First Cedar Bank with her last savings, a crumbling brick building that had been empty for decades. They laughed behind her back as she swept out years of dust and cobwebs, turning the old lobby into makeshift living quarters. But when Diana finally pried open the massive steel vault door that had been rusted shut since 2005, their laughter died in their throats. Inside wasn't just forgotten cash and safety deposit boxes filled with jewelry. There were documents, photographs, and evidence of secrets that powerful people had spent decades trying to keep buried. Secrets worth killing for. The road to Cedar Mills had been nothing more than a dot on Diana's worn hiking map when her weathered boots finally gave out completely. 3 months of wandering mountain trails after her business collapse had left her with calloused feet, a weathered face that looked older than her 48 years, and a bank account that wouldn't cover a decent meal. The irony wasn't lost on her that a woman who'd once managed cybersecurity systems for major corporations was now counting quarters for coffee. Cedar Mills appeared through the morning mist like something from another era. Main Street stretched barely 4 blocks, lined with buildings frozen in time. Half the storefronts stood empty, their windows covered with faded newspaper and decades of dust. The few people she passed eyed her with the particular suspicion small towns reserve for strangers who arrived on foot. Baron, her 10-year-old beagle, limped slightly from arthritis, but kept his nose to the ground, wagging his tail as if he'd brought Diana to exactly the place they were meant to be. 5 years together, ever since Tom had brought him home as a rescue, before the accident that took her husband's life in 2020 and began her spiral into financial ruin. The Cedar Mills Diner occupied the corner of Main and 2nd, its neon sign flickering weakly in the gray morning light of early 2025. Diana pushed through the glass door, setting off a bell that announced her arrival to the handful of customers nursing coffee. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," muttered a man in overalls from the counter, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Baron trotted over to the man, sitting politely and tilting his head with those soulful eyes that seemed to disarm even the most hardened hearts. After a moment's hesitation, the man's face softened, and he slipped Baron a piece of bacon. "Don't mind Earl," said a woman in her 70s with gray hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail. "He's suspicious of anyone who hasn't lived here since birth." "I'm Mildred." "I'm Diana," she replied, sliding into a booth near the window, grateful to rest her aching feet. "Just passing through, looking for somewhere to clean up and maybe find some work." "Work?" Earl snorted. "Lady, this town's been dying a slow death for 20 years. Mildred poured Diana a cup of coffee without being asked. Diana noticed the wedding band still on Mildred's finger, though it sat alongside a smaller band that likely signified widowhood. Something passed between the two women, the silent recognition of a loss that needed no words. "What kind of work did you do before?" Mildred asked gently. "Cybersecurity. I managed network security for corporations before I quit to help run my husband's family business." Diana wrapped her hands around the warm mug, inhaling the steam. "I just need something temporary while I figure things out for my daughter's next college tuition payment." "You have a daughter?" Mildred's eyes softened further. "Lily. She's 19, sophomore year on partial scholarship. Smart as they come, studying finance." Pride briefly overtook the exhaustion in Diana's voice. "After my husband Tom died in the accident 5 years ago, his family took control of the business and pushed me out. They never approved of me to begin with." Mildred nodded sympathetically, then changed the subject. "You need a place to stay?" Diana's gaze drifted to the window, where across the street stood a 3-story brick building with First Cedar Bank carved into the stone above its entrance. Even from a distance, she could see the boards covering the windows and weeds growing through cracks in the sidewalk. "That place for sale?" she asked. Earl nearly choked on his coffee. "You thinking of buying it?" "Maybe. Depends on the price." Mildred and Earl exchanged a glance Diana couldn't quite read. "You'd have to talk to Betty Morrison at the real estate office," Mildred said slowly. "But that building's got problems. Structural issues. Code violations." Barron barked once, as if offering his opinion on the matter. "Every building's got problems," Diana replied, scratching behind Barron's ears. "Question is whether they're fixable." "Where are you listening from today? I'd love to connect with you. Hit subscribe and leave a comment about where you're tuning in from." After finishing her coffee, Diana walked 3 blocks to Morrison Real Estate, Barron trotting loyally beside her. The office was cramped and cluttered, with Betty Morrison sitting behind a desk covered in property listings. Betty was a slender woman in her mid-60s who'd clearly spent decades dealing with difficult buyers and impossible properties. She looked up from her paperwork with the expression of someone who'd heard every crazy real estate idea at least twice. "You must be the woman asking about the old bank," she said, before Diana could introduce herself. "News travels fast," Diana smiled, extending her hand. "Diana Reynolds." "Small towns," Betty replied, not taking Diana's hand. "That building's been on the market since 2008. City's been trying to get rid of it almost as long. What's wrong with it? Besides being empty since 2005, needs a new roof, new plumbing, new electrical, probably has asbestos." Barron circled the office, sniffing curiously at the baseboards while Diana and Betty talked. When he returned to Diana's side, he rested his head gently on her knee. "Asking price is $12,000, but I'd take 8 just to get it off the books," Betty said, pulling out a thick folder. Diana felt something stir in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced since before Tom died. "I'd like to see it." "You got 8,000? I've got $300. Diana thought about Lily's tuition bill waiting in her email, the dwindling scholarship that wouldn't cover next semester. Betty stared at her for a long moment, then burst into laughter. "300? Lady, that wouldn't cover the inspection fees. Would you take $300 as a down payment?" Diana met Betty's eyes with the quiet determination that had gotten her through the worst days after Tom's death. "I'll sign whatever papers you want. Take full responsibility for the condition and pay the rest as I can." Betty studied her for another long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral. Let me get the keys." The keys to the first Cedar Bank felt heavier than they should have in Diana's pocket as she stood before the building's main entrance. The heavy wooden doors bore the scars of decades of neglect. Barron sniffed excitedly around the perimeter, tail wagging as if he'd discovered a treasure. Diana inserted the key, surprised when it turned easily. The door swung open with a groan that echoed through the empty lobby. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through gaps in the boarded windows. The space was larger than it appeared from outside, with high ceilings and marble floors that spoke of an era when banks were built to inspire confidence. Diana stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the hollow space. The air smelled of old paper, dust, and something else she couldn't identify. Behind the main counter, teller windows stood empty, their brass fixtures tarnished but intact. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, several bulbs missing, covered with cobwebs that glistened in the dim light. In what had been the employee break room, Diana discovered her first artifact of the building's former life. A coffee pot sat on a counter, its glass carafe cracked, still holding the ghost of coffee brewed decades ago. A handwritten note was taped to its side. "Property of Martha, do not remove." The human touch of that note struck Diana unexpectedly. Martha, whoever she was, had worked here when this place was alive with daily business. She'd made coffee, probably gossiped about customers, maybe worried about her job when rumors of closure began circulating. Diana carried the coffee pot downstairs and set it on the main counter. A small act of restoration in a place that seemed to hunger for human presence. Baron had been circling the main floor, nose twitching, tail stiff in the posture he took when something wasn't right. He kept returning to the rear of the main floor, where a massive vault door stood slightly ajar. The steel door was at least 6 inches thick with an intricate combination lock and wheel mechanism. Diana approached it cautiously, running her hands over the cool metal surface. The door was too heavy for her to move alone, and rust had seized the hinges. "What do you think, Baron? Should we see what's behind door number 1 tomorrow?" Baron barked once, then twice, more insistent than usual. Okay, maybe just a peek." Diana wedged her shoulder against the heavy door and pushed with all her strength. It didn't budge. She'd need tools and help to get it open. As night fell, Diana set up a small camp in the lobby. Baron curled up on her sleeping bag, his warm presence a comfort in the unfamiliar space. She pulled out her phone, smiling at the lock screen photo of Lily in her college sweatshirt, and sent a quick text. "Found a place to stay. Strange but promising. Love you, kiddo," Lily replied almost immediately. "Stay safe, Mom. Call if you need me to come get you. Love you more." Diana fell asleep listening to Baron's steady breathing and the whispers of a building that seemed to be telling her she belonged here. The next morning, Diana walked to the Cedar Mills Public Library, hoping to learn something about the bank's history. The library occupied a small brick building that had seen better days, but inside it was clean and well organized. The librarian was a woman in her early 60s with graying brown hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked up from cataloging books as Diana approached. "You must be the new owner of the bank," she said. "I'm Margaret Kellerman." "Diana Reynolds." She extended her hand. "News really does travel fast here." "In a town this size, everything's news," Margaret smiled, but like Betty, there was something careful in her expression. "Are you planning to renovate?" "That's the idea. I was hoping to learn something about the building's history. Maybe understand why it's been empty so long." "What kind of information are you looking for?" "Anything, really. When it closed, why it closed. What happened to make people avoid it?" Margaret disappeared into the back room and returned with a thin folder. "This is most of what we have on the bank." Diana opened the folder and immediately found what she was looking for. A faded newspaper clipping from March 2005 bore the headline, "First Cedar Closes After Federal Investigation." The article was brief and frustratingly vague, mentioning irregularities in the bank's records and the sudden departure of bank president James Kellerman. "Kellerman?" Diana said, looking up at Margaret. "Any relation?" Margaret's face went pale. "He was my father." The admission hung between them like a challenge. Diana studied Margaret's face, seeing the resemblance to the man in the grainy newspaper photo. "What happened to him?" "He died in a car accident 6 months after the bank closed. Single vehicle crash on Highway 9 during a snowstorm." Margaret's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she straightened papers on her desk. "I'm sorry," Diana said softly. "I lost my husband in a car accident 5 years ago." Something in Margaret's expression shifted, a softening around the eyes. "Does it ever get easier?" "Not easier, different. The sharp edges get a little smoother." Diana paused. "The investigation concluded that the bank's problems were due to poor record-keeping and some questionable loans." Margaret's tone suggested she didn't believe it. "My father was the most careful, methodical man I ever knew. He didn't make mistakes with money. And he certainly didn't drive recklessly in bad weather." Margaret met Diana's eyes directly for the first time. "You catch on quickly. What do you think really happened?" Margaret glanced around the empty library, then leaned closer. "I think my father found something he wasn't supposed to find. And I think someone made sure he wouldn't tell anyone about it." Diana spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about Margaret Kellerman's words as she explored the bank's upper floors. Barron followed her from room to room, occasionally stopping to sniff intently at certain spots, as if detecting ghosts of the past. The largest office at the end of the hall bore a nameplate that read, James Kellerman, President. Diana pushed open the door and stepped into a time capsule. Unlike the rest of the building, this office had been left almost exactly as it was the day the bank closed. A heavy wooden desk dominated the room, its surface covered with papers and a leather blotter. Behind the desk, built-in shelves held banking regulations, reference books, and family photographs. A small framed picture showed a younger Margaret with a man who was clearly her father. The same thoughtful eyes, the same composed expression. Diana moved around the desk carefully, feeling like an intruder in someone's private space. The desk drawers were unlocked, filled with the usual office supplies, but the bottom drawer contained something more interesting. A personal calendar for 2005, its pages filled with James Kellerman's neat handwriting. Diana flipped through the months, noting the routine appointments that filled a bank president's days. But as she reached March, the entries became more cryptic. Instead of names, Kellerman had written only initials. Meeting with RB 2 p.m. Call JM about situation. Review files with SC. The final entry, dated March 15th, was the most intriguing. Final meeting, vault documentation, 7 p.m. March 15th was 3 days before the newspaper article announcing the bank's closure. Whatever James Kellerman had been documenting in the vault might still be there, waiting behind that rusted door. Diana carefully tore out the March pages and slipped them into her pocket. As she prepared to leave the office, something caught her eye. The wastebasket beside the desk held crumpled papers that had somehow survived decades. She smoothed out the most legible one and found a handwritten note in Kellerman's careful script. If something happens to me, Margaret must know the truth about the deposits. The words sent a chill through Diana. This wasn't the note of a man planning routine business meetings. This was the note of a man who believed he was in danger. Barron suddenly growled, a sound so unusual from the gentle dog that Diana froze. She moved to the window and peered out. A black sedan sat across the street, its engine running, windows tinted too dark to see inside. The car hadn't been there when she'd arrived. Diana watched for several minutes, but the car didn't move. Finally, she decided to go outside and see who was watching her building. But by the time she reached the front door, the sedan was gone, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the certainty that her activities hadn't gone unnoticed. Back inside, Diana spread James Kellerman's calendar pages across the teller counter. The pieces of a puzzle were beginning to emerge, but the picture they formed was troubling. A bank president making mysterious appointments, warnings about danger, and a car watching her every move. Barron barked sharply, drawing Diana's attention to the front door. Through the glass, she could see a tall man in an expensive suit approaching the bank. His salt-and-pepper hair and confident stride spoke of wealth and authority. For a fleeting moment, Diana considered grabbing her backpack and slipping out the back, but something made her stand her ground. The man entered without knocking, as if he owned the place. Barron placed himself between Diana and the stranger, not growling but alert, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by a watchful caution. "Ms. Reynolds," the man said pleasantly, "I'm Richard Blackwood. I understand you've recently purchased this property." Diana hadn't told anyone her last name except Betty and Margaret. News travels fast in Cedar Mills. "Indeed it does." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I represent certain interests that have concerns about this building." "What kind of concerns?" "Historical preservation primarily. This structure has significance to the town's heritage." Diana gestured to the dusty, neglected lobby around them. "No one's been preserving it for the past 20 years. Nevertheless, I'd like to make you an offer." Blackwood removed an envelope from his jacket pocket. $50,000 for the building, as is. No inspections, no contingencies. Diana stared at the envelope. $50,000 would cover Lily's remaining college tuition, with enough left over to start fresh somewhere else. The practical part of her brain screamed to take the money and run. But Barron was still standing guard, his posture rigid. And those calendar pages, that crumpled note about Margaret needing to know the truth. "I'm not interested in selling," Diana heard herself say. "I have plans for this place." Something cold flickered behind Blackwood's eyes. "I strongly suggest you reconsider. This building has structural issues that could prove dangerous." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Diana felt her heart rate spike, but she forced herself to appear calm. "Thanks for the concern, Mr. Blackwood, but I think I'll take my chances." Blackwood placed his business card on the counter. "My offer stands for 24 hours. After that, I can't guarantee it will remain so generous." After he left, Diana sank onto a dusty chair, her legs suddenly weak. Barron came to her side, resting his head on her knee in his familiar gesture of comfort. "What have we gotten ourselves into, boy?" she whispered, scratching behind his ears. Barron's tail thumped against the floor, his canine confidence unshaken. Diana picked up Blackwood's business card. Executive Director of Clearwater Security Consultants. A quick internet search on her phone revealed little about the company beyond a generic website listing private security and risk management services. But the connection was clear. James Kellerman had written about meetings with RB in March 2005. Richard Blackwood. 20 years later, he was still trying to protect whatever secrets lay hidden in this bank. Diana looked toward the vault, its massive door still stubbornly ajar but unopened. "What did you find in there, James?" she murmured. "What was worth killing for?" The next morning, Diana woke with newfound determination. Barron's excited barking at a squirrel outside the window reminded her that life went on, even in the face of mysteries and veiled threats. After a quick breakfast, Diana headed to Margaret's library with James Kellerman's calendar pages and the crumpled note. Margaret's face paled as she read her father's handwriting. "He knew," Margaret whispered. "He knew something was going to happen to him." "And he wanted you to know the truth," Diana added. "Do you have any idea what he might have found?" Margaret shook her head. "I was only in my 40s when he died. He never discussed bank business with me." "I need to get into that vault," Diana said, "but the door is too heavy for me to move alone." "I know someone who might help." Margaret reached for the phone. "Helen Wilson runs the hardware store. She's been here forever. Knows every building in town." Helen Wilson turned out to be a spry woman in her late 60s with short silver hair and hands strong from decades of manual work. When Margaret explained what they needed, Helen's eyes narrowed. "That old bank vault? Folks have been trying to get in there for years. What makes you think you can?" "Because it's my bank now," Diana said simply. Helen studied Diana for a long moment. "Your bank, your problem if something goes wrong. Meet me there in an hour." With Helen's expertise and tools, plus Diana and Margaret's combined strength, they managed to wedge the vault door open wide enough for a person to slip through. Barron insisted on going first, sniffing cautiously as he disappeared into the darkness. Diana followed with a flashlight, revealing a space about the size of a large closet-lined floor to ceiling with safety deposit boxes. Most of the boxes hung open and empty, their contents long since removed. But several boxes in the back corner remained locked, their brass nameplates tarnished but readable. Davidson, J. Morrison, B. Blackwood, R. Names that meant little to Diana, though the last one made her breath catch. But one plate made her pause. Box 37, Special Holdings. Box 237 was larger than the others and showed no signs of having been opened since the bank's closure. Unlike the standard safety deposit boxes, this one required two keys and bore an additional lock mechanism Diana didn't recognize. "This is what your father was documenting," Diana said to Margaret. "But how do we open it without the keys?" Barron had been circling the vault, sniffing the corners. Suddenly, he began pawing at a loose panel in the floor. Diana knelt beside him and pried up the panel, revealing a small metal box. Inside were several keys and a slip of paper with numbers written in James Kellerman's handwriting. 150305? March 15th, 2005, Margaret whispered. The date of his final vault meeting. The key and combination worked. Box 237 opened with a soft click, revealing contents that made Diana's breath catch. Inside was a leather portfolio filled with documents that told a story of systematic corruption spanning decades. The centerpiece was a ledger book with two sets of numbers running side by side. One column showed the amounts deposited in customer accounts, ordinary savings and checking balances. The other column showed where that money actually went, funneled through a complex network of offshore accounts and shell companies. $27 million in customer deposits had been diverted, laundered, and redistributed to entities with names like Mountain Holdings LLC and Cedar Investment Partners. "My God," Margaret breathed, looking over Diana's shoulder. "These are signatures from people still in town. Betty Morrison, Sheriff Williams." Diana photographed every page with her phone, then studied the signature pages more carefully. Besides Blackwood's name, she recognized others from her brief time in Cedar Mills. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Cedar Mills hadn't just been home to a corrupt bank. The entire town leadership had been complicit in stealing millions from ordinary citizens who'd trusted them with their life savings. But the most damning evidence was a series of handwritten notes in James Kellerman's careful script documenting meetings where he'd confronted the conspirators. The final note, dated 3 days before his reported death, was particularly chilling. Blackwood threatened Margaret today. Said accidents can happen to anyone. I've hidden copies of everything where they'll never find them. If something happens to me, the truth must come out. Diana was so absorbed in the documents that she almost missed the sound of a car engine idling outside. Barron growled low in his throat, a warning. "Someone's watching the bank," Diana whispered. They quickly returned the most important documents to the box, closed the vault as best they could, and exited through the back door. As they hurried through the alley, Diana caught a glimpse of the black sedan. It was following them at a distance. "We need to get these documents somewhere safe," Diana said as they hurried toward the library. "And I need to call my daughter." Back at the library, Diana called Lily and explained the situation in careful terms, aware that their phones might be monitored. "Mom, this sounds dangerous," Lily said, her voice tight with worry. "Why don't you just take Blackwood's money and leave?" "Because Margaret's father was killed for trying to expose this, honey. And because the money they stole came from families who are probably still suffering from the loss." "At least send me copies of what you found," Lily insisted, "for safekeeping." Diana did, encrypting the files with a password only Lily would know, the date they'd adopted Barron. Do you think Diana should continue investigating or take the money and leave? If you've ever faced a difficult decision like this, share in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to see what happens next. That evening, Diana noticed Sheriff Williams' patrol car parked across from the bank. Something about his vigilance seemed off. Using the skills from her cybersecurity days, Diana hacked into the county employment database from her laptop and made a startling discovery. Robert Williams had been discharged from the state police 15 years ago for taking bribes. He had never been certified as a sheriff in the state. "He's not a real sheriff," Diana told Margaret over the phone. "The badge, the uniform, it's all fake." "Then who's been running law enforcement in Cedar Mills?" "Someone with enough money and influence to create a completely false identity." As Diana hung up, Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It contained two photos, one of Margaret leaving the library, taken with a telephoto lens, the other of Lily walking across her college campus, clearly taken that same day. The message was simple. Tomorrow, noon. Bring everything you found to the bank. Come alone. Diana's hands shook as she deleted the message. They were watching Margaret. They were watching Lily. This was no longer about solving a historical mystery. It was about keeping her daughter safe. She didn't sleep that night. Barron sensed her anxiety, staying close, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose as if to say, "I'm here." In the morning, Diana returned to Helen's hardware store, hoping the older woman might have advice on protecting herself. The store was empty except for Helen, who was arranging tools behind the counter. "Back so soon?" Helen asked, eyeing Diana carefully. "I need something for self-defense," Diana said quietly. "I think I'm in trouble." Helen's expression hardened. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where people threaten your family." Helen disappeared into the back room and returned with a small device. "Panic button. Press it, and it sends an alert to my phone and several others around town." Diana studied Helen with new interest. "Why do you have this?" "Because my husband Frank lost everything when that bank closed. 30 years of savings, gone overnight. He drank himself to death within a year." Helen's voice was flat, emotionless. "I've been watching Blackwood and his friends for decades, waiting for someone to find what you found." The revelation stunned Diana. "You knew." "Suspected. Couldn't prove it. But I've been documenting strange cars, unusual meetings, anything that might eventually build a case." Diana felt a surge of hope. "Will you help me?" "Already am?" Helen smiled thinly. "That panic button connects to a network of people who've been waiting 20 years for justice, including Judge Elena Rivera at the county courthouse. She's been investigating corruption here for years." With Helen's guidance, Diana met with Judge Rivera that afternoon. The judge was an imposing woman in her 70s with steel gray hair and the stern demeanor of someone who'd spent decades dealing with criminals. "Ms. Reynolds, what you found could finally bring down a network we've been tracking for years," Rivera said, reviewing the documents Diana had brought. "But it's dangerous. Blackwood has connections beyond Cedar Mills, government contracts, intelligence community ties." "They threatened my daughter," Diana said. "I can't just walk away." The judge nodded gravely. "Then we set a trap." From her desk drawer, she removed a small recording device. "Federal wire. If you can get Blackwood to admit his involvement on tape, we can move immediately with arrests." "And my daughter?" "Already under federal protection. Your friend Margaret, too." Diana's phone buzzed with another text. "1 hour, Ms. Reynolds. The bank. Alone." As Diana prepared to leave, Judge Rivera gripped her arm. "Be careful. Blackwood didn't get where he is by being careless." Diana made it 3 blocks from the courthouse before noticing the black sedan following her. They stayed just far enough back to maintain the illusion that she wasn't being watched, but close enough to intercept if she tried to deviate from the route to the bank. The recording device felt warm against her chest, its proximity to her heart making her hyper-aware of every heartbeat. Barron walked beside her, unusually alert, his aging body somehow rejuvenated by the sense of purpose. The bank building looked different in the late afternoon light, more sinister. The front door stood open, and Diana could see figures moving inside. Blackwood had made no attempt to hide his presence. Diana paused at the entrance, checking her phone one last time. A text from Lily. "I'm safe. Federal agents here. I love you, Mom." She activated the recording device with a tap and walked through the door, Barron at her side. Blackwood sat behind the old teller counter like he owned the place, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who were clearly more than business associates. The vault door had been completely removed, and the interior was being systematically emptied. "Ms. Reynolds," Blackwood said, pleasantly, "so good of you to join us. I trust you had time to consider my offer." Barron growled low in his throat, positioning himself between Diana and the men. "I want to understand exactly what this place was used for," Diana said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, "before I agree to anything." Blackwood's smile widened. "Curiosity is an admirable trait in most circumstances. In your case, it might prove fatal." One of Blackwood's associates handed him a leather portfolio that Diana recognized from the vault. Blackwood opened it to reveal documents with multiple signatures. The First Cedar Bank was chartered in 1979 for the express purpose of facilitating certain financial transactions that required discretion, Blackwood explained. "We provided services that traditional banks couldn't or wouldn't offer." "Money laundering," Diana said flatly. "We prefer the term financial privacy services," Blackwood corrected. "Our clients included businessmen, politicians, and other individuals who needed to move large sums of money without attracting unwanted attention from federal regulators." Diana felt the recording device capturing every word, but she needed more specific admissions. "What about James Kellerman? Why did you kill him?" Blackwood sat down the charter and leaned forward, his casual demeanor slipping slightly. "James suffered from an unfortunate attack of conscience. He threatened to expose our operations to federal authorities, which would have been inconvenient for everyone involved." "So you had him murdered?" "I personally didn't do anything to James," Blackwood said carefully. "But yes, his car accident was arranged by associates of mine who specialize in solving problems permanently." Diana felt a chill at the casual admission. "How many people have you killed to protect this operation?" "Over the years? A dozen, perhaps more. The beauty of small-town America is that accidents are rarely investigated thoroughly, especially when the local authorities are part of the arrangement." Blackwood gestured to one of his associates, who produced a thick envelope. "But enough about ancient history. Here's your payment, Ms. Reynolds. $50,000 as promised. All you have to do is forget everything you've seen here." Diana made no move to take the envelope. "What if I refuse? Then you'll suffer the same kind of accident that befell James Kellerman and several others who couldn't appreciate the value of discretion." Blackwood's associate moved closer, and Diana could see the outline of a weapon beneath his jacket. Barron bared his teeth, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. "There's one thing I don't understand," Diana said, buying time. "Why keep the bank closed for decades? Why not just destroy the evidence?" Blackwood's expression darkened. "Because federal investigators were already suspicious about the bank's closure. Destroying the building would have raised too many questions. Better to let it sit empty and hope time would erase any inconvenient memories. Until I came along and spoiled that plan." "You did indeed, which brings us to our present situation." Blackwood stood and walked around the counter, approaching Diana with predatory confidence. "You have information that could damage important people. That information needs to disappear, along with anyone who's seen it." Diana heard the faint sound of vehicles outside, multiple engines moving fast. Either Blackwood's reinforcements were arriving, or the FBI was finally making their move. "You're too late," Diana said. "I've already given copies of everything to federal prosecutors." Blackwood's laugh was cold and humorous. "Federal prosecutors in this state are remarkably accommodating when properly motivated. Your evidence will disappear into bureaucratic limbo, and you'll disappear permanently." Through the windows, Diana could see black SUVs surrounding the building, but couldn't tell if they belonged to the FBI or to Blackwood's organization. The recording device continued transmitting, capturing evidence that might never see the inside of a courtroom if Blackwood's people controlled the outcome. "Last chance, Ms. Reynolds," Blackwood said, nodding to his associates. "Take the money and walk away, or join James Kellerman in whatever comes after this life." Barron lunged suddenly, sinking his teeth into the ankle of the man reaching for his weapon. The distraction was brief but effective. In the moment of confusion, Diana pressed the panic button Helen had given her. The sound of footsteps on the bank's front steps made everyone freeze. Sheriff Williams entered with 4 men in tactical gear, their weapons drawn and ready. Behind them came another figure that made Diana's blood run cold. Betty Morrison from the real estate office, carrying a pistol like she'd been part of this operation all along. "Took you long enough," Blackwood said to Williams. "Our guest was beginning to outlive her usefulness." Williams holstered his weapon and approached Diana with the confidence of someone who believed he controlled the situation completely. "Ms. Reynolds, you've caused us considerable inconvenience. Time to clean up this mess." "The FBI is monitoring everything," Diana said, though she was beginning to doubt whether federal backup would arrive in time. Williams laughed, pulling out a small electronic device that beeped steadily as he waved it near Diana. "You mean this wire you're wearing? We've been jamming federal communications for the last hour. Nobody's coming to save you." The device Williams held looked sophisticated and expensive, military-grade equipment that suggested resources far beyond what a small-town conspiracy should have been able to afford. Diana realized that this operation was bigger than she'd imagined, with connections that reached well beyond Cedar Mills. "Who are you people, really?" Diana asked. Blackwood seemed pleased to finally reveal the full scope of their organization. "We're what you might call facilitators, Ms. Reynolds. For 40 years, we've helped certain government agencies move money that couldn't appear in official budgets. Black operations, foreign interventions, activities that require complete deniability. CIA, among others. The bank was perfect cover, a small-town institution that could process millions of dollars without attracting attention." Betty Morrison stepped forward, her pistol trained on Diana. "Should have minded your own business, honey. Should have taken the money and left town when you had the chance." Diana looked around the room, counting weapons and exits. Blackwood's men controlled the front door. Williams and his team blocked the side entrance, and Betty had positioned herself to cover the vault area. The only way out was through the basement, but reaching that door would require getting past at least 3 armed people. Suddenly, Barron began barking frantically, not at the armed people but at something outside the window. Diana glanced over and saw Helen Wilson from the hardware store, standing directly across the street, staring intently at the bank. "There's one thing you haven't considered," Diana said, playing for time. "Which is?" Blackwood asked. "Margaret Kellerman isn't just sitting quietly somewhere. She has copies of all the evidence and a direct line to Judge Rivera." Blackwood's expression darkened. "Miss Kellerman is no longer a problem. My associates visited the library an hour ago." The casual way Blackwood mentioned Margaret's fate made Diana's vision blur with rage. "You're lying." Williams pulled out his phone and showed Diana a photograph, Margaret's apparently lifeless body, in what looked like the library's back room. "Very convincing, don't you think?" Williams said. "Distraught daughter discovers her father was involved in banking fraud. Can't live with the shame." Barron was now frantically pawing at a section of the floor near the teller counter, his behavior so unusual that even Blackwood's men were distracted by it. Suddenly, the building's lights went out, plunging them all into darkness. The blackout lasted only seconds before emergency lighting kicked in, casting eerie red shadows throughout the bank lobby. In that brief moment of confusion, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Federal agents, everyone on the ground now." The voice came from behind Blackwood, from the vault area that everyone had assumed was empty. Diana turned to see Helen Wilson standing in the vault doorway, holding a badge and a service weapon with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. "Special Agent Helen Wilson, FBI Financial Crimes Division," she announced. "You're all under arrest." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Helen, the mild-mannered hardware store owner who'd been part of Cedar Mills for decades, was actually a federal agent who'd been building a case against the conspiracy for years. The hardware store was perfect cover, Helen continued, keeping her weapon trained on Blackwood. Every criminal operation needs supplies. You've been buying evidence of your own crimes from me for 15 years. Williams reached for his sidearm, but Helen was faster. Her shot echoed through the bank lobby, and Williams went down hard, clutching his shoulder. Federal agents are surrounding the building, Helen announced to the remaining conspirators. Drop your weapons and surrender. Diana used the distraction to dive behind the counter, pulling Barron with her. From their hiding place, she could see Blackwood's face contort with rage as he realized his operation was collapsing. If I can't have the evidence, then no one can, he snarled, pulling out a device that looked like a remote control. This building is wired with enough explosives to level half the block. Diana felt her blood turn to ice. Blackwood wasn't bluffing. The man had the resources and connections to obtain military-grade explosives and the desperation to use them rather than face federal prosecution. You'll kill yourself too, Diana said. Better than spending the rest of my life in federal prison, Blackwood replied. Death is the easy way out. Helen kept her weapon aimed at Blackwood but couldn't risk taking the shot while he held the detonator. Put it down, Blackwood. There's no escape. Surrender, and you might live to see trial. I don't think so, Blackwood said, and his thumb began to press down on the button. But before he could complete the motion, Barron launched himself from behind the counter, a blur of fur and desperate loyalty. The aging dog sank his teeth into Blackwood's wrist, causing him to drop the detonator. Blackwood howled in pain and rage, kicking Barron hard enough to send the dog sliding across the marble floor. Diana cried out and ran to her faithful companion, who lay whimpering but still conscious. Helen dove for the detonator while her fellow agents stormed the building from multiple entrances. The conspirators, seeing their leader disarmed, began surrendering one by one. But Blackwood himself remained defiant. He pulled a small pistol from an ankle holster and aimed it at Diana, who was kneeling beside Barron. You've ruined everything, he hissed. Actually, came a new voice from the basement doorway. You did that all by yourself, Richard. Everyone turned to see an elderly man step into the room. Though his hair had gone completely white and his face was deeply lined, there was something in his eyes that Diana recognized immediately from the photographs in his office. James Kellerman, she whispered. Hello, Richard, Kellerman said calmly. I think it's time we finished our conversation from 2005. Blackwood's face went pale with shock. You're dead. You died in a car accident. I'm very much alive, Kellerman replied, moving closer with his hands visible and empty. I've been in federal witness protection for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to testify against you and your organization. The FBI faked your death, Blackwood said, understanding flooding his voice. They did indeed, and for 20 years, I've been documenting every aspect of your operation, every murder you ordered, every dollar you laundered through my bank. Blackwood's gun hand trembled as he realized that his carefully constructed empire was collapsing completely. Not only had the FBI been watching him for years, but his primary victim had been gathering evidence against him all along. Give me the gun, Richard, Kellerman said gently. It's over. For a moment, it seemed Blackwood might actually surrender. Then his face hardened, and he swung the gun toward Kellerman. Two shots rang out simultaneously. Helen's bullet caught Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second shot, from an FBI agent entering through the front door, struck his leg. Blackwood collapsed, the gun clattering across the marble floor. As federal agents secured the scene, Diana cradled Barron's head in her lap. The loyal dog had saved them all, at significant cost to himself. His breathing was labored, and blood matted his fur where Blackwood had kicked him. Hold on, boy, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Just hold on. What moment in this story has touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more heartfelt stories. 6 months later, Diana stood on the steps of what was now the Cedar Mills Community Center, watching as residents came and went. The spring sun of 2026 warmed her face as she sipped coffee from a travel mug. The aftermath of what locals now called the bank conspiracy had been messy and complicated. Federal agents had arrested over 30 people across the country, including several high-ranking government officials. The trials were ongoing, but most of the Cedar Mills conspirators had agreed to plea deals in exchange for testimony against bigger fish. Betty Morrison received a 10-year sentence for her role, but was cooperating with authorities to identify other conspirators. Sheriff Williams was serving 20 years for fraud, impersonating an officer, and attempted murder. More importantly, the $27 million stolen from depositors had been recovered, along with interest and investment gains that brought the total to over $200 million. Families who had lost everything when the bank closed were receiving checks that represented their original deposits multiplied several times over. The FBI had offered Diana a witness protection program, but she declined. Cedar Mills was home now. She had made her decision, turning down the lucrative cybersecurity job offer from the city to stay and help rebuild the community that had given her a purpose again. She and Margaret had used part of the reward money to convert the bank building into a community center, with computer labs, meeting spaces, and a small museum documenting the conspiracy and its unraveling. Barron had survived his injuries after extensive veterinary care, though he moved more slowly now. The aging beagle had become something of a local celebrity. Children would come specifically to pet the hero dog who had helped save the town. As if summoned by her thoughts, the front door opened and Barron limped out, followed by Lily. Diana's daughter had transferred to a college closer to Cedar Mills and was spending her spring break helping at the center. "Mom, Judge Rivera called," Lily said, joining Diana on the steps. "Blackwood's sentencing is tomorrow. 25 years minimum." Diana nodded, satisfied. Richard Blackwood would likely spend the rest of his life in prison, as would many of his associates. But some of the highest-ranking conspirators had evaded justice through political connections and legal maneuvering, a reminder that their work wasn't completely finished. James Kellerman emerged from the building, leaning on a cane. His reunion with Margaret had been emotional and complex. 20 years of separation had created a gap that would take time to bridge, but they were working on it, one day at a time. The community had initially been shocked by his return, but his testimony and the subsequent recovery of the stolen funds had turned him into something of a local hero. "Henderson family got their check yesterday," he told Diana. "Martin called me in tears, said they're finally able to buy back their family farm." Diana smiled, feeling the weight of the past months beginning to lift. The community center was still facing challenges. Donations and grants only went so far, but they'd received support from several foundations impressed by their story of community resilience. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Diana expected it to be from Margaret, who was meeting with potential donors, but instead it was from Tom's family. "Flights booked for next month. Can't wait to see you and Lily. We have a lot of making up to do." After seeing the news about Cedar Mills, her late husband's family had reached out, apologizing for their treatment of Diana after Tom's death. The reconciliation was tentative but genuine, another wound slowly healing. Diana felt the familiar ache of loss when she thought of Tom, but it was softer now, mellowed by time and new purpose. He would have been proud of what she'd accomplished here. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the horizon, Diana remained on the steps, Barron dozing beside her, contemplating the journey that had brought her here. From desperate widow with $300 to her name to community leader and catalyst for justice, it wasn't a path she could have imagined. The newly installed sign above the bank's entrance caught the golden light. Cedar Mills Community Center, rebuilding hope since 2025. with a smaller line beneath, "In memory of those who lost hope but were never forgotten." Baron stirred in his sleep, paws twitching as he chased dream rabbits. Diana smiled and gently stroked his ear. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they had faced the dangers of the Forgotten Vault and the secrets it had held for so many years. She wasn't just a widow or a mother or a former business owner anymore. She was Diana Reynolds, the woman who had brought justice to Cedar Mills, the woman who had turned a forgotten bank into a place of community and healing. "Come on, boy," she whispered to Baron as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky. "Let's go home."